Hi, I'm giving a go here, recording a video demonstration here. Not as much a tutorial, more as a kind of a guide between 3D Studio Max's two different versions of their material editor. For a long time, all we had to deal with was the original here, which they are now calling the compact material editor. But since 3D Studio's release of 2012, we have gotten a brand new one as well, which matches a lot of other programs, kind of like Maya with their hypershader, where we can plot out our materials in flowchart mode. 3D Studio's version of this is called the Slate Material Editor. And just to give you a quick note here of what I've got going is I've opened up two different instances of 3D Studio Max 2014 here. In one of them, I've got loaded up the compact material editor, and in the other one I've loaded up the Slate material editor, and I'm going to kind of go through each one and give you the similarities and differences and kind of the how-to here of how these things, these two separate user interfaces kind of function here. Our original one over here on the right side, if we take a look at real quick here, is our compact material editor. And in 3D Studio, you can get to these a couple of different ways. Let me kind of maximize this version here real quick so we can just take a look at this one first. Your material editor icon here up at the top on your main toolbar has been there since the first version of Max here, but now if you click and hold, you'll have two different choices here. The very top one, which looks just like a kind of a checkerboard sphere with a dialog box over top of it, is our compact material editor, the older version. And underneath it, the one that looks like it's kind of a bar with an arrow going to a different bar, is our Slate material editor. And we can open up the same thing, the same instance material editor in this different view. You can also, when you first open 3D Studio, let's say you're kind of a veteran and you want to go back to the compact mode way of doing things because it's what you started learning or what you've been used to, you can come up to your modes menu inside the material editor itself and switch back and forth between compact and Slate material editors as well. So let's start with our compact material editor. And what I've been finding is very useful here lately is to kind of begin in the compact material editor and then make any refinements and adjustments to my textures by transferring over into the Slate material editor. And what we've got here for our material editor is a whole lot of spheres. Just a quick note, if you right click on any one of these spheres, it'll bring up some of the options here. Default 3D Studio might show you something a little bit more like this with 3 actual spheres, and right clicking will give you just a different height and amount of sample window spheres here. So I like to go to kind of the big one so I can see them all at once. Double clicking on any one of these will open up a larger preview that you can size and rescale much as you like, so that you can take a closer look at any textures that you're creating. Each one of these spheres is a different slot that we can house a new texture or a new shader or a new material in. Down along the right hand side here, we've got some options. The ones I'm going to talk about today are just a few of them. We've got the ability to change up here at the top. If we click and hold, we've got the ability to change what the texture is sampled on. In other words, we can go with a cylinder in our sample window or a box or the standard sphere. Again, this doesn't change how your material will work on a model. This just changes how it's displayed for you in the sample window here as you're creating this thing. Underneath it, we've got the ability to turn on and off a backlight in each of the sample windows, so you can see it with full shadow or with actual kind of reverse backlighting to it. The third button down is one that I use an awful lot, and that's to turn on and off a kind of a colored checkerboard background, and this helps me test things like refraction and reflection rather than just have a dark gray there back there. We can use a checkerboard. I'll skip over some of the others for now. Let's go to the bottom bar here, where we've got the Get Material button. Clicking this will allow you to kind of start from scratch with maybe a different shader than our 3D Studio standard shaders. As you can see, I've got V-Ray loaded here, so it might be a little different than what you'll see on your screens. But we can do things like multi-sub-object textures, which we'll get into quite a bit later, or your mental ray textures. A little further over here, the third one in is our Assign Material to Selection button. In other words, if I have a model in my scene here, I can select that model, in this case our sphere in the scene, and click this to assign the material over to it. Fourth button over here is your reset map. In other words, put it back to default. You can either do this two choices, either both in the scene and the material slot. In other words, all your textures in your scene will go away, or you can just do it in the editor slot itself, which means that it'll erase it here, but it'll keep it in your scene so that you can kind of reuse some of these slots since they only give you a finite amount. The other important ones I want to talk about right now, we'll get to some more of these in the future, of course. But on this right-hand side, on this thing underneath here, we've got what looks like a checkerboard with a light bulb over it. If you want your textures to show up on screen and in your viewport, let's say I kind of make an adjustment here and we make this a green texture. This is the one we have assigned to our sphere. And let's say just real quick here, let me throw in a photo here. That'll work, some 3D Studio standard photo, that we want it to appear in our viewport. Notice we've got this kind of picture of Barker or Treewood on our texture now, but it's not appearing over here, just our standard diffuse is. This is your toggle switch to turn them on in your viewport. So a lot of you will start making textures and you'll have to remember to click this little guy on if you want to be able to see what those textures look like in your scene. The second one in from the right hand side here is the most important button. It's our go-to parent button, and if we're working in the compact editor, this button is hugely important, because if I dig down into any one of these to make adjustments, say to this bark texture image inside 3D Studio, and I want to get back to where I was originally, right? All of our settings have changed here. Our go-to parent button will always take us back out one step at a time towards the finished result. I'm just going to get rid of that picture here because it's unnecessary for what we're doing here. Underneath, we've got the ability to rename our material in this compact material editor. In this case, it kind of gives you a default material name. Usually it'll say default 1 or material number, and you can always change these. Let's say you're making a texture for water. We can actually put in a name here for the texture, which will help us keep things straight, especially when you're importing different models and textured things from other scenes, stuff like that. Next door to the name, we've got two things, one on either side. The first is our color picker. So let's say we had reset the all of our texture slots, or we imported one from another file, something like that, and our sphere is nice and textured here, but don't have it in our sample slots to adjust it. Your color picker will allow you to toggle on and select a texture from any one of these models in our scene, and it'll kind of fill in that blank texture slot for us with whatever was on that current object. Next door to that would be our standard button, and a lot like our get material button, this is where we can change from standard materials to any number of other things. Real quick, I'm going to switch over here to a mental ray setup just to show you this, and we can click on this standard button and maybe we can get to some of the mental ray textures that we have in here that work pretty nicely, a little bit differently than our normal standard ones. Underneath, we've got the shader basic parameters, in which case we can change the shader type. Blend and Fung are kind of our standards for 3D art and design. Other things include anisotropic, translucent shaders, multi-layer shaders, and some metal shaders and other things. We'll just leave it at blend for now. It's got a couple of checkboxes that we can play around with, as well as two-sided textures and face map textures, which will put it on every single polygon of your model. We can also make it so that that texture is faceted, gives you the edges for every single polygon, or unfaceted, or even wireframe mode for any of those demonstrations that you like to show off your models and the undercarriage and cool things like that. Underneath is our basic parameters, which as we get to texturing, we'll go over a little bit more in depth. But this is our standard: how to change the color, the shininess, opacity, and how much light that the texture may or may not give off. And all of our settings, like our map rollouts and stuff, will appear down under here as well. Again, we'll get into those as we actually start texturing, not so much kind of this brief overview and the differences between Slate and Compact Editor. So you can see here that our diffuse color is what I changed to make our sphere kind of green and everything. And that's how our Compact Editor works. If you want to add different layers to a compact shader or a compact to a shader in our compact editor, we have to add them to our channel buttons or our map channel buttons, the same thing down here, one at a time. You know, notice I put that picture on using something like bitmap, but let's say I use a checkerboard procedural texture in here, and then I want to stack in a noise for part of that checkerboard, and so our textures start to get 2 and 3 and 4 or 5 deep, so that we can get all sorts of various details. And I have to hit that go to parent button to back out step at a time or click on each one of these channels where I've added a different procedural map to go in, or what I like to call digging in or digging out of our texture. As you can probably already kind of guess, this gets to be a little confusing when I start filling up all of these different map slots, channel buttons, with a whole lot of different kinds of textures that may have 1, 2, or 3 different layers to them. And then I have to remember to kind of back out to wherever I need to make adjustments within my texture. So it can get awfully confusing here. But it's kind of what we all started with if we started to learn 3D Studio, and it's what we all have grown to know. However, there's kind of a little bit easier way to do that, and that is the Slate Material Editor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this whole view over here now and go from our compact material editor to our Slate Material Editor, just for a quick demonstration as to how these things are similar and how they kind of work. If I go up to a modes menu here and I swap it over from compact to Slate Material Editor, the whole user interface changes completely. Not entirely, and I'll show you where the similarities are in this stuff. To a flowchart mode, where suddenly we've got this big giant graph editing area in here, a navigator, our parameters are now off to the side, and our map browser now shows up all the time on the left-hand side. Your material slots are not gone. They are still around. They now just kind of appear along this side, left-hand side window here. The material map browser kind of takes over here at the beginning, but if you slide down to other options all the way down past your material map, you should be able to find other things that you can use, such as controllers, the material library, C materials, and all the way down here at the bottom are your sample slots. One of the first things I like to do is kind of minimize a lot of these menus that I may or may not be using all the time, and kind of move my sample slots back up to the top, because I like to utilize those a little bit more than so I can click and drag and drop and kind of reorganize this user interface to my liking. I like to kind of get rid of a lot of this stuff here that I may or may not be using and just kind of use what I know I'm going to use a little bit more. You can kind of drag to resize, or use the scroll bars now to get to and from and back and out of. And now here's your material slots. Here's the one that we started making in the first place as a little demonstration here, named water, but looks nothing like water here yet. And if I double click that now, it will bring it and drop it up into our flowchart area, our view number 1 here, it says. This guy is our standard texture. You'll notice all of your map slots here are listed. Only now, instead of a list with some channel buttons that we have to kind of dig into, you've got these little nodes that we attach lines just like a flowchart to. And it kind of spreads this whole idea out, and each one of these I can kind of click on, double click to bring up its settings over here on the right hand side, one bit at a time. I double click over here and I've got, you know, the very, very similar top hand side of our whole texture with where all of our maps are. And what I've done is kind of added, as I went in the last time here, just kind of dug in and added checker maps and noise and smoke and stacked some things on top of each other. Only difference is now I don't have to click in to dig into all of these. I still can over here on the right hand side, but that go-to parent and that kind of clunky design there from the future is now gone, because I can see all these things right up here in the front. And I'll double click on each one of these guys to kind of bring open that original or any of the stacked texture maps that I've been using. And at about this point in time here, I think what we're going to do is kind of switch back to that compact material editor and we are going to create a good old standard texture of some sort there, and then repeat the steps here in the Slate Material Editor so that everyone can kind of get a good feel and a good understanding of how we go through the exact same process in these two different user interfaces. To get started, I'm probably going to go ahead and go back up to my modes menu here, and we'll switch back over to the Compact Material Editor. And what I want to do is kind of come up to my utilities menu here and just reset my material editor slots altogether so we start absolutely nice and fresh. I've got my sphere here, and I'll just continue to kind of texture this thing as kind of our example. But what we're going to do is take our first empty texture slot here, and I'm just going to click and drag and drop it over our sphere to assign that texture. And we'll make some adjustments to the settings in here and maybe put a few little items in our map material editor slots to create an actual texture. We'll go ahead and we will create some water here real quick, just some standard water, and then we'll do the exact same steps in our Slate material editor so that we can see how working in both is a little bit different or even changes just a little bit. So first thing first, since I've already assigned this texture to my sphere, I'm just going to kind of come up here and give it a name. Might as well work smart. And then I'm going to just define this some texture editing parameters here and some settings to get the best result for water. May or may not know, but whenever we kind of do water or glass or a lot of that kind of stuff, most of the time we'll use the color black. It works a little bit nicer. It kind of doesn't give us any kind of ghosting or glare effect at all. We'll change water to black, and then we'll adjust our opacity down here to something almost see-through completely. Water, not entirely. We may want it to be a little bit darker below the water, so I'll go with something around 20 opacity. And then I'm going to double-click on this thing just to bring up a little bit of a sample window here and show you kind of how the workflow goes where I'm going to use some of this stuff. I will go ahead and turn on my shaded material in viewport so that we can see the same thing over here in the viewport. I'm also going to turn on that checkerboard background I showed you at the very, very beginning here because as you can see, we want to be able to see something through our texture map on this thing. And water kind of tends to refract or bend light and color as it goes through. So we can see now that although our sphere is mostly translucent, not 100% opaque, we can see through it, but it's almost ghostly more than water, which we want to look a little bit thicker and glass-like. Water is also shiny, so one of the first things I want to kind of do is I want to come into my specularity color here and just kind of bring it all the way down to white. And then down into the specular highlights, got some numbers that I just kind of always almost use for getting a quick water texture going here. If I raise my specularity to 160, that makes it very, very shiny. And then if I bring my glossiness up to about 60 just to meet things down, our specular highlight shrinks and it kind of starts to look a lot more shiny, like something wet or glassy. Some of our basic settings, that's probably good enough for water. And then I'm going to open up my maps rollout here. Click the little plus sign there to get it going. And I'm going to add some actual procedural texture maps to a couple of these guys just so that we can get a nice procedural water texture going here. First one I might want to do is bump. We want our water to have a little bit of wave to it, so let's kind of go in here, click on that none button or the channel button here on the side of our bump selection, and that will open up this separate window for our material map browser, which you may remember you saw in the Slate editor just all the time there over on that left hand side. So the same menus and the same settings still exist in both user interfaces. It's just a little bit different on how we go about getting to it. In here, I'm just going to go ahead and add the good old-fashioned noise for our bump slot, which is going to give us some waves in our water. I'll adjust some of the settings that it brings me immediately into the noise settings here, and I want to make the waves a little bit smaller, which will give me more of them, so I'll drop that size down to maybe 5, and now you can start to see that specular highlight get broken up a little bit more like waves in a swimming pool or ocean or whatever. And I can go ahead and play with things like the different settings. We can do some fractal up the levels just to get some more smaller waves in with our bigger ones, and you'll really break up the surface, kind of like you'd see churning or wavy water be. When I'm finished adjusting my noise settings in the compact material editor, I've always got to remember the second button in up here at the top, right above the map that we're currently in, is our go to parent button. I've dug in to that bump map now and added this noise map, which allows me to change all kinds of settings on the noise itself just for that one channel, that bump channel. If I want to get back up to the top where we've got all of our different choices for different maps and add something else to kind of further create a water effect, I've got to hit that go to parent button. I'll have to hit it for every single map that I add one time. In this case, we only added the one map to the bump, and so just hitting that go to parent button one time will back us right out to the beginning screen here with all of our basic parameters. We can go at it again. Again, just the same, we're going to come down to the next one, which is our reflection slot. And I'm going to click on that None Channel button to add a map from our standard list here. If we want to make it reflective, a lot of us know that ray trace is the thing to do. So let's go ahead and add a ray trace from our standard maps into that reflection slot. You should see some reflections show up in our sample view here real quick. Probably way too many reflections for what we really want to accomplish. We don't have to make any adjustments. It's kind of on auto detect and it works pretty well just the way it is for this kind of a texture. So all we do have to hit is that go to parent button and keep digging in and then back out to adjust these things. At this time I'm going to make sure that my ray trace is toned down a little bit because that's a hell of a lot of reflections. We don't want our surface of our water to be mirror-like, and instead we want it to be very reflective, but the surface of water dims things down in the reflection. So rather than 100 in our reflection amount, let's drop that down to maybe 20 and see what that does, and that gives us kind of a dimmer amount of those reflections, and we can still see our specular highlights and waves through it. You may even reduce it a little bit lower, 10, 15 to your liking, and whatever might work best for your scene. Our water is still kind of ethereal here rather than thick and gloppy as water should be because all of our checkerboards here are kind of staying the same and it just kind of looks ghostly more than anything else. For a flat pane of glass or something that might work just fine, but for water we want to be able to have that high refraction in there and bend the color and light as we see through it. We're going to use a ray trace in our refraction map as well for this quick little thing. And the best way to do that, rather than kind of click on the channel button and dig in and edit all that stuff again and again, is we can just kind of click and drag and drop down that original ray trace from reflection to refraction and tell it to make it a copy. Immediately our water looks much better. It is refracting, according to the amount number here, 100% of light and color. Water's a little bit more see-through than that. We don't want it to kind of be, again, mirror refraction. So honestly, you can reduce that refraction number down to 0, still get that bending color and light, but retain some of that black tint from our original diffuse selection. Right then and there, you've got yourself a rather good water. And we'll do a render, but there's nothing in our scene, so it's going to look a little bit odd there, but that's your water. Not too bad. We can start to see some of those ripples and the lights reflecting and refracting off of that thing. If I change my background a little bit, we could do a little bit nicer demonstration there on how our water is looking. Let's choose kind of a gray color for it. Right, and maybe we'll just real quick we'll put a teapot behind that water so that we've got some idea of how that refraction is working. There we go. And we'll do a quick render just so we can start to see how that light gets bent and changed, and we've got our globe of water looking pretty good there. You want to add a blue tint to your water, change that default color from black to blue or purple or green or any number of such things. But our water is looking actually pretty good right now for a default scene with no lighting and all that good stuff. Now what I want to do is to show you the major differences and similarities between the compact material editor and our new Slate Material Editor is I'm going to take this same idea here and I'm going to create a brand new texture, only this time we're going to make the same water in the Slate Material Editor. So first things first, I'll come up to my Modes menu here, come down to that Slate Material Editor and make sure I select it, where everything will kind of reappear from what I had out there in the whole first place. If you were following along with me and you have this kind of stuff, what we can do is we can select all of it, and this nice red X up here at the top will delete it and get it out of there for us. If we want to adjust the current texture, it should show up still in our sample slots right the way it was. We can click and drag it out here. If you want to make changes and have them applied directly to that sample slot, go ahead and make it an instance, and we can see what we're going to end up with in the end. And this is that first texture that we created in our compact material editor, only now laid out for us in Slate view with all the different flow charts boxes kind of added up into our nodes here in the bump, reflection, refraction. Double clicking on this and we can see the color and the specularity and the opacity and all those good changes that we made. What I want to do is select all that again and get rid of it, because I'm going to start from scratch here. I'm going to choose another material slot, an empty one here. The one right next door should work for us. And I'm going to click and I'm going to drag that out there and tell it to become an instance for me. And what we do is we're starting with this good old-fashioned list of maps. Double clicking on it, we should bring up the same window, those standard default settings that we changed when we made our original water texture in that compact material editor. So this should be very familiar looking to you. The only thing that's different is how we're getting there now and how we're seeing this stuff spread out in the flowchart. So right off the bat, I can change that diffuse color from that kind of white to black. Make sure my specular color is a nice white. Change my opacity from 100% to maybe 20%. And increase my specularity to 160 and my glossiness to 60 to get my standard kind of view out there now. In order to get a preview window of it in the Slate Material Editor, we just double-clicked it in the first place, but if we double-click our sample slot in the Slate Material Editor, it's just going to put another instance of it out here in the flowchart view. Instead, we can right-click on this thing, this little thumbnail up here that says our texture in it, and what we can do is we can do the same things like rename it. We've also got the rename slot up here. I'll call it water number 2. And we can right-click and we can also open a preview window very similar to the other way that we can then kind of drag the corner out and make enlarge to see what the heck we're actually doing here. This right-click menu, again, houses a whole lot of information and things that we can do, from updating to changing a material type, on down to sending the material to the curve editor or the dope sheet, which is kind of advanced animation stuff you'll get to later. You've also got the preview object types in this right-click menu now. We have that cool little checkerboard button to show your background that we turned on for this one is now in that menu list, right-click menu. We can turn it on, just like we did in the other one, only it's just in a different location. We've now got to do that right-click, open up that thing similar to the quad menu, and use it that way. We've also got our show shaded material in viewport in this right-click menu, or now show realistic material in viewport, which is kind of quite nice as well. From here, we are ready to kind of start adding things to our other menus. Now you can come right down on these default settings, open up your maps rollout in those default settings, and use it just like you did the compact editor. We can kind of click in here and add in that noise. But we're going to do it the flowchart way because it's a little bit nicer and it'll give you a better idea on how to begin a texture in that slate. On the right-hand or the left-hand side here, we have also, along with our sample slots, that material map browser that before only showed up when we clicked on one of these none channel buttons. And we want to kind of utilize that. It's all right in front of us, so we don't have to keep going back and forth and in and out and up and down our stacks to get to different places. All the same things should be in here. We can kind of get rid of the materials. We don't want to start with a full material. That's what we're creating. But we can open up that maps and that standard and find things like our noise now here all of a sudden. So I come down in here to our maps, our standard, grab that noise. I'm just going to click and drag it out into our empty flowchart area. that noise will show up. I can double click on that noise to get all of my settings right back where I was in the first place. Make my little adjustments. We reduced the size to 5. I turned it to fractal and turned up the levels all the way to 10 just to give ourselves some more detailed waves there. But it's not showing up in our little sample slot here because we have to tell it to connect to the proper channel. And all we have to do with that is click this little node here and drag out and drop into our bump. We can also kind of select this guy. We can delete just the connection, select any one of these maps and delete those, and then kind of come back to our undo button to get them right back since we do want to do that. We can also come from the other direction, click and drag from bump and attach it to that noise. Our little waves should show up in that specular highlight, at least, since we haven't added any reflection or refraction yet. But we're already starting to see how this is kind of correlates to the original that we made in the first place. Likewise, just like we clicked and dragged out from the material map browser on the left-hand side here, we can actually click and drag from, let's go with our reflection here from that node, click and drag it out, and just drop it out here. And it'll bring up a little kind of floating menu here where we have our standard maps that we can choose from, and that ray trace is in there. And we can just select it and it'll already kind of attach it for us. Again, it's quite a bit, a little too reflective here. So what I'm going to want to do is reduce the amount of that. I don't do that in the ray trace tools itself. Instead, I come back to that top standard, and my setting is still there. I can drop that down from 100 to 15 or whatever it was we decided we liked for our last attempt at that. Likewise, we can add multiples of the same map type to this so that both of these are going in here. And we can do that just by dragging out another node attachment and dropping it into that same texture slot so that we don't have to fill up our flowchart screen here with all these various different windows when one might do for two different things. We had default settings for our ray trace, so we might as well use it for reflection and refraction, and just reduce that refraction number there from 100 to 0, again in our standard texture settings. And there you have it. Water from both the compact material editor and water from the Slate material editor. So you can get a feeling of how that works and try to create your textures now back and forth a little bit in both. I mentioned earlier that I kind of like to try and start in the compact material editor. Maybe I'll start with a standard texture and decide to click on this button here, and instead of standard I'll come down into my mental ray and use arc and design materials, where maybe I'll start with, let's say, a physical glass template preset, and then I can jump over into the Slate material editor from there, clear off my screen, and I'll find it, the one that I started creating here, and all I have to do is click and drag it out, make it an instance, and start with the different texture here where I can maybe change the color of the diffuse map, maybe a checkerboard, so that our kind of glass will change a little bit there. I'll adjust this checkerboard map to go to the some refraction or something, and we get some different ideas, but it's all kind of the same tied together there flowchart idea. Hopefully that cleared some things up between the Slate material editor for you and the old compact material editor. As always, it's always kind of a good idea to work in both and learn both so that you're better prepared for whatever may come at you in the future.